We're live, Lou. Good morning. How you going?
Very good. Back at it.
Lou's locked down in Wanaka. Not really locked down, are you? As of tonight,
No, soon to
and
be level 2 down here.
taking some leave tomorrow, skiing. What a life!
Yeah, yeah. Someone's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it. Someone's got to carry the team in terms of the
Yeah,
joy department.
yeah.
Uh, we're gonna. It's a bit more technical than our usual um, podcasts for particularly for property legals, and we've got some cross feed going with lateral lawyers and my Facebook page. Morning, everybody. Hope everyone's hanging in there. If you're in Auckland, it's a drag. I know this the team at Lateral and at Property Legals and some of our close cohort are certainly starting to struggle a little bit. There's not that kind of Armageddon fear and adrenaline of last year's lockdowns. It's pretty trying. I know people from overseas would say, you guys, some of my friends have been saying to me, you don't know the half of it, considering what they've been through in London and other places. But end of the day, it's only relative to what you experience, and this started to kind of suck and drag its heels. But anyway, what can you do? He's got to get on with it. So we thought we'd try and add a little bit of value by talking about house price predictions and the latest Reserve Bank technical paper on what they think is going to happen. So they think, broadly speaking, they think that prices are going to fall, although they of course said that last year as well, and they were quite wrong about that. Lou's just going to trot through the 4 reasons from the report and sort of translate that in layman's terms, the kind of 4 broad reasons why they think that prices will fall.
So the first reason they sort of look to is lower demand and people sort of leaving New Zealand. So following sort of the last COVID outbreak last year, we saw a lot of people returning home, which sort of increased demand. Whereas this year, COVID sort of dragged on. There's a lot less travel, a lot less people moving here. So they're kind of looking towards that as reducing the demand.
And people leaving also, as well.
That came back. People departing as well. So a big outflow of people from New Zealand since sort of early last year. So that, is one reason why the housing market might fall. The second one they look at is sort of a building boom, so too much supply. They think by mid next year it should be the steepest increase in houses in the last 60 odd years since they started recording the data. Third one would be sort of interest rates. We've seen a lot of people speculating about this. But yeah, it looks like we could be headed for a big increase in interest rates, which might be okay for investors who have sort of got a lot more room to adjust themselves to, deal with those. Whereas first home buyers with their first home probably got a lot less they can adjust with their income, their mortgage rates, things like that. That could, shut them out of the market or scare them off a little. And the fourth one would be increased costs for landlords. So we've seen a lot of changes this year with landlords being able to offset costs that might put them off holding as investment properties, which could see more houses coming onto the market as well.
Thank you, Luella, for translating that technical data from the report. So we've got a great article, and we'll put it in the comments afterwards, from our friends Joseph Darby and co over at Milestone Direct. And so I didn't come up with any of this, but when I read the report, skimmed the report because it's pretty gnarly, I sort of thought to myself intuitively, that doesn't sound right. So hacking cough this morning. So, the Reserve Bank, first of all, they kind of, and these are some of the reasons why Milestone Direct have come out and said, well, that is just the opinion of the Reserve Bank. And of course, as a very average study of history, along with my LLB, learned that everything is written by someone for someone. It's probably the most useful thing I learned 10 year, whatever it was, degree, is that everything's written by someone for someone. And the Reserve Bank obviously are getting a lot of stick about the unaffordability of houses, so it kind of suits their messaging, so to speak, to be negative, or not negative, I should say, to actually say that this is under control and the measures we put in place are going to work. Bear in mind, however, that last year they predicted in the first lockdown in April 2020 a 10% decrease in house prices, and they actually went up 30%. So they were out by 40%. And Milestone Direct has given some quite interesting reasons why they think that may not happen again, because there's probably not as much give in the market for that kind of increase again. It would be crazy if there was, but the reasons why they think potentially there will not be a decrease in prices, will continue to either stay constant or increase again. So first of all, they've talked about is, say, some things have changed, but a lot haven't. Building supply shortages, wood, steel, fittings imported from overseas. Apparently, the cost of those supplies has, drastically increased due to supply problems, and also shortages of skilled tradespeople and other professionals. They also talked about the unbelievable, what they described, mindless bureaucratic tax, and they attributed this to another commentator, not themselves, that's rife in government and by way of RMA. And I know there is, talk of changes to the RMA, but at the moment we have a very unpopulated country, a lot of room, a lot of premier land, but there's huge legislative constraint around being able to actually build on that land. So that's a reason that they've given why potentially the prices will not increase. Another one is interest rates rising. Well, there's a lot of talk about that, and it gets thrown around as kind of like this handle or banner. Oh, interest rates are going to go up. It's going to cause pandemonium. Well, from all the data I've looked at and people I've talked to that know a lot more about this sort of stuff than some little property commercial lawyer like us, is that even if they increase, they won't increase to historical normal or average rates around 7% overnight. So even with, as Lou said, even if they do increase, if they go to 3-4% for a lot of the market, that's, unless people start losing their jobs and the broader economy starts failing as well, the likelihood of that actually slowing down demand, maybe for first-time buyers, but for the market overall, could be overstated. And like anything with economics, it's a really complex issue, certainly not simple. And to say, oh, interest rates are going to cause a crash, it can't be viewed in the abstract as being wholly determinative of what's going to happen with prices. And even if you do afford it a central role in what actually happens with prices, there's increases and increases. A couple of base points is not going to, I don't think, from what I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone wants to get in the comments and challenge that, I don't think that a small increase would necessarily cause a market crash. Another one is migration. While net migration is, while there's net outflows at the moment, this is a black swan event, something like the COVID pandemic, and New Zealand's a really desirable place to live, incredibly desirable place to live, particularly with all the other political things going on in the world at the moment. And over time, I would think, and these people that wrote this article will think, that will normalize again, and we will have a high demand. We will have high demand from land from those people coming in. And
surely once we see an increase in like vaccination rates and travel opening up and borders opening, surely that will balance itself out.
Yes. And the last one is talking about the politics of it, and the government with the RBNZ are supposedly independent have asked the government to consider the impact on housing affordability. That is has drawn widespread obviously criticism, because it's supposed to be separate. The whole Reserve Bank is supposed to be separate from any kind of political influence, but it's become such a social issue that obviously government are doing everything within their power to actually influence the Reserve Bank over that. In the end of the day, though, sorry, just reading back the report. Yeah, no one really knows. You've just been given, Luella's just given you a whole lot of technical reasons that the Reserve Bank has cited for the fact that prices may increase. That prices may fall, and we've just given you a whole lot of counterpoints, as Clyde Roz pointed out, one of my banker friends on the Facebook comments pre going live, was that for premium land, and with the RMA constraints, it's hard to see that there will be a decrease in affordability. Sorry, a decrease in prices. I haven't had enough coffee yet this morning. For that land, historically, he would be right. Residential land or property is obviously one of the best investment classes out there. To quote Bob Jones, who I'm not overly a fan of, but he certainly made a lot of money out of property, and he said the reason why residential property will always be a great investment is that we live in a stakeholder society. It's got a social construct to it, which gives it value beyond just the abstract economic value. Everyone wants to live in the most desirable places. Everyone wants their kids to be in the best schools. And a lot of people want to keep up with the Joneses and say, oh, I own this house down Victoria Ave and Remuera or wherever the wealthy people live these days. I'm out of touch. Back when I was 21 years old, Victoria Ave was the place to be. So sorry to anyone in Victoria Ave if I've just offended you. Anyone in Herne Bay or the eastern suburbs or wherever you think it is the kind of holy grail of land in the isthmuses. But everybody, that is an enormously important reason why residential property over time will most likely continue to increase. Okay.
Yeah.
Got some comments. Lisa Pringle, how big do they think the interest rate increase will be? I think it was a couple of basis points. I don't think it's going to be significant. I don't think it's going to be anything like 7%. I think it was someone out there who's read it and can remember exactly. I didn't look at the massive details on it, but there was talk of putting the OCR, I think it was 0.75 the day before we got into lockdown, which would result in an increase of 1 to 1.5% in interest rates at the most. But like I said, anyone out there, feel free to weigh in on that. Lance Shaw, there's no way prices will go down. Imagine when border opens up and immigration picks up again. People want to live in NZ. Not enough supply, too much red tape, wages increasing, and people can afford these loans. Get on the bandwagon. There you go. It's a direct one of the Shaw brothers. No, very good, Lance. That's just pretty much a summary of all the stuff that the Milestone Direct article set out. I don't disagree with any of that. What will be more interesting is what will happen to land in more speculative areas where perhaps there is a more speculative quotient or component to people's choices to invest in that land. So less desirable land and around the fringes of the city or out of Auckland that have been bought, dragged up by the overall market. I remember in 2007, they suffered quite hard, whereas all the blue chip suburbs continued to go up at a rapid pace. So that would be
the desirable land.
Yeah. Another thing we'll cover off quickly, we haven't put it on the headline, but a few people have reached out to me in the last week or so, about 3 or 4 actually, and asking me what the position is where for residential settlements or commercial for that matter, where a purchaser is doggedly insisting on a vendor is doggedly insisting on a purchaser completing settlement or the other way around. So either or, a party is saying you must settle. Well, the Auckland District Law Society sale and purchase agreement, if it provides for vacant possession, there is an argument that because under the mandate under the Public Health Act, that no one can be forced to settle because that vendor can't actually leave that property by law for the reason of moving all their stuff and getting a movable truck and move somewhere else. But there's no actual law on it. I don't understand that there's been any decisions on it, and it's a case by case basis. So, for example, if you are a vendor that lives overseas, you don't live in the property, and if the purchaser also lived out of town or overseas, and there was no need for either party to move, and for the sake of making this simple, there were no chattels involved because it was just literally empty. Because that's question chattels, although it doesn't come into vacant possession. That's just a bit of a side matter. What would be the situation then? Would there be an ability to provide vacant possession? Arguably there would, wouldn't there, Lou?
Yeah.
So in that situation, as a bit of a test case, to make my point, there's no legal reason why under the ADLS SPA that vacant possession couldn't be given and taken on the settlement date, which would mean a vendor could compel a purchaser to settle and vice versa. That's the legal position, but I was debating with someone because they were taking that approach with me because it suited them, and I said, well, yeah, okay, but like with everything, we've got to put law into the context or the construct of the circumstances that we live in. And right now, the macro situation is that we're in a global pandemic and everybody's locked down. You're not going to carry a lot of favor as either a vendor or a purchaser trying to insist on a property settlement taking place, and during a level 4 lockdown. You may be able to charge penalty interest, but if you're looking to issue a settlement notice on the basis that either party is in default, so for this sake of my example, let's just say that the vendor issues a settlement notice saying the purchaser is in default because they're refusing to settle because they can't move, that you issued that settlement notice and then they didn't settle within 12 working days if the level 4 goes on longer than 4 weeks. If you turn up to the court and try and run the argument that this person's going to lose their $100 or $200,000 or $300,000 deposit because you issued a settlement notice in the middle of a pandemic, that High Court judge or District Court judge will do
seriously frowned upon.
Yes, it will do everything they possibly could to try and use the law to stop that person losing that deposit. If it was only from the dogged pursuit of the only reason they couldn't settle was because they're in level 4 and the vendor was being dogged, they would use at the end of the day, the only institution that can, or party that can write law in New Zealand is Parliament, and there's no legislation around it at the moment. But there are certain ways and means that a judge can interpret a contract to give rise to what they see as the fairest outcome possible. And I bet my last dollar, if I was still a betting man, I bet my last dollar that judge would be looking at the situation and they wouldn't have a lot of sympathy for a vendor trying to take a deposit of someone. So bearing that in mind in terms of how we advise our clients, that really is the last hurrah in terms of how the worst case scenario where it could end up. It would take a particularly poorly advised and aggressive purchaser and an aggressive ballsy lawyer on their part, and dare I say it, someone with the blinkers on and not a lot of wider understanding of what's going on here in the world to actually pursue that course of action. It'll be incredibly opportunistic, and I haven't seen it done yet. What's more likely is they squabble and argue over whether or not penalty interest is payable when they can move, and make a bit of a song and dance and threaten and et cetera. But to pull the trigger to go that far and spend all that time and money going off to court about it, I don't think it's that likely.
Particularly like this time, like maybe like last COVID, when people sort of had no idea, there was nothing to kind of look back on. Whereas like now we've got kind of COVID clauses drafted. There's kind of an accepted way to go around it now.
Yeah. Just make sure you're properly advised and you have a COVID clause in your agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, it would be an outlier situation if parties ended up locking horns in that manner. It's just got to be sorted out with a degree of diplomacy and some decency between the parties at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else got any questions? I see we've got quite a few people watching today. Obviously, people are over lockdown and got nothing better to do than watch us talk about law, which I feel sorry for you. Just going to wait a couple of minutes. Maybe play a little bit of music. See what we got.
I like that you've got the full mic set up this morning.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Pretty cool, eh?
Dedicated.
Really enjoying this. Let's see what I can do here. No, it's not working. It's called Calaban Cora. It's very cool. what's his name? Tim Ferriss. He's written some cool books about influential people. He's got this on. He sends out a weekly email of all the stuff he's listening to, and listen to this quite a bit on my walks at the moment. Right, we're going to wait one more minute. See if anyone's got any more questions. Might as well. There's 10 people watching. Come on, guys, speak up. Clyde Ros, you out there? I'm sure you've got some axe to grind. Fire in a few testy prompts about Jacinda, or not that we're political on this show.
Sure, something from Cron.
You out there, Cron? No one's biting. Here we go. Mark Atterbury, he's a really good agent in, I think, is it Remuera, Mark? I won't try and guess the agency, because if I get that wrong, then you'll really be upset with me. How long can settlement be extended beyond the agreed date before a party can cancel the agreement? So, Mark, the legal position is 12 working days under the UP. There we go. UP is sticking together. I hope that's right, unless she's stitching you up, Mark. 12 working days. So I'll just go through the whole settlement notice process. So first of all, to issue a settlement notice, let's just give it in the example of a vendor issuing a settlement notice. So if a vendor is what's called ready, willing, and able to settle, so they can give vacant possession. So let's use the example of the vendor actually not living in the property, just to make it easier, because it's a complex situation if they are. So the vendor's not living in the property, and they have a discharge of mortgage from their bank if they have a mortgage, and there's enough equity in the property to actually discharge that mortgage. If you've got all your paperwork done and your lawyers have completed all the transfer requirements on what's called Land Online, Land Information New Zealand's online transfer portal, then your lawyer very carefully can check all that off and can issue what's called a settlement notice to the purchaser to say, we are ready, willing, and able to settle. We're good to go, and you need to tender your purchase price now. If they don't tender the purchase price by 4 o'clock on the date of settlement, then the vendor can issue what's called a settlement notice, which is a quite carefully prescribed technical legal document saying we were ready to go and you haven't given us your money. Then you have 12 working days to actually come up with the money. Okay. So once you do that, then the purchaser obviously must settle now within that time. So if the purchaser doesn't settle within that time, there are a number of options available to you. You can ask for, you can cancel the agreement, ask for a forfeiture of 10% of the deposit, up to including 10% of the purchase price. Okay. You may have an issue if you're dealing with a real estate agent that doesn't want to give back their commission or all of their commission. Although a lot of the good agencies we've dealt with in those situations, the very rare times we've had to deal with those situations, agency will usually either cut a deal or give you a commission on the basis that you sign something saying they can remarket and resell the property. So it's a windfall for the vendor. The other thing you can do is you can elect to not take the deposit, and you can reserve your position, and you can sue for either damages or losses, for losses associated with the transaction, i.e. your lawyer's costs, if you had to move and there was some sort of contingency or situation that you were put in only because of the purchaser's failure to settle, you can claim for those costs. You can also claim for a diminution, so a reduction in purchase price that you are able to achieve for the property for a period of up to 12 months from the original settlement date that you're required to settle under. So if, for example, you sell a house for $2 million, but the purchaser defaults, you can sue them for say there is some sort of huge economic meltdown following all this COVID situation. 9 months later, you sell the property for $1.5 million. You can actually go after them for $500,000. Now, just a word of caution there. That's a real difficult battle to fight. It takes an enormous amount of emotional energy, and you could come unstuck if you and your lawyer don't have all your ducks lined up to the point that there was nothing that a purchaser could actually poke holes in terms of the being ready, willing, able to settle. The settlement notice was technically essentially has to be perfect, and you have to demonstrate that they actually received you received 1.5 million, and also that you didn't just sell it to, say, a related party, and tried to, you'd have to prove that that was at market, and then above all that else, you'd have to make sure that that purchaser had enough liquidity, or they could have assets, but you need a way of making sure they haven't stowed away those assets in offshore accounts, property in other people's names, cryptocurrency, any particular way that they could actually see it coming if there was a crash, and if they were well advised, they could just move all their assets. Sure, you could bankrupt them. That's not going to give you any money. It might give you some sort of twisted satisfaction of the fact that they've caused you loss and then you caused them loss. But at the end of the day, people will do anything, and bird in the hand's two in the bush. So in the few instances over the last 15 years where I've had to act in this situation, acting for a vendor, you almost always want, if the deposit is available for forfeiture, you'd be well advised to just take that deposit as a bounty, so to speak, and have the take the deposit as a bounty, and then go and remarket and sell your property, assuming the market still is as hot as it was. So it's an unfortunate bind to get into. It happens incredibly infrequently, but when it does, it can be a long, drawn out, stressful process. Just about as long and drawn out as that explanation.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't end up wanting to have to pay your legal costs and their legal costs if you got it slightly wrong.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you're paying your legal costs, and you're paying your lawyer irrespective of whether or not you're able to recover the money from the purchaser. And you're also, like you said, Lou, it's a great point, paying their legal costs too if you're wrong. Now, pretty unlikely you're paying their costs if in substance you're right. The court could see that, but still
Yeah.
Anybody else got any questions? That was a really good one. We might as well keep going for a bit. We don't have a lot more to do this morning. We can sell the trust account, chase some bills, see what Liam's up to. We're in Torbay.
Write a couple of articles.
I think that's it. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
That was time.
Breakfast time, you reckon?
Yeah.
Have a great day, everybody out there. Stay safe, and we'll see you again online in the next few days, I'm sure. Cheers.
Cheers.